What's up, guys? This is Anthony, and I'm here with the latest NIS RPG, The Awakened Fate Ultimatum. Now, this is a dungeon crawling RPG that is the sequel to the Guided Fate Paradox. Now, of course, as the sequel, it has some expectations to live up to because, like it or love it, the Guided Fate Paradox was a pretty good game. So, can this game top its predecessor? Well, we are about to find out. So let's get into the story. You play as Shin Kamikaze, aka one of the most generic anime names I have ever heard. He is an average high schooler with some of the most emo thoughts you can think of, which is only enhanced by the voice acting of Johnny Yambosh, because he just plays such a great emo person, I suppose. Anywho, you play as this cynical teenager who is impaled by a sword from a devil, and you are promptly sent to Celestia. From here you meet the angel Jupiel, who is kind, nice, sweet, is a girly girl at heart, but she is also a military genius. She fights a lot, pretty much, and she's probably one of the most capable angels in Celestia today. You also meet Ariel, a devil who is kept captive. She is sarcastic, she really only cares about her research, and she was pretty much kidnapped from the angels to help them make a god. And that will be you. You are God, because after you are impaled, you are then implanted with the Fate Awakening Crystal, which turns you into a living weapon, aka God. From here, the game explores a very, very dark concept, and that is the weight of a human life. A lot of this game is pretty much spent making decisions about the lives of those around you. Do you choose to kill off some to save the majority? Do you risk your own life to try to save them all? This game asks you to make a lot of decisions, which is one of the things I really, really love about it, and a very great addition from the last game, which is pretty campy and lively, as opposed to this game, which is really dark and deep and contemplative. A lot of the times you'll ask yourself, do I really want to sacrifice myself to try and save everybody, or do I make this much smarter decision? Or it really challenges who you are as a person, as either an idealistic person or as a person who's like, look, we got an objective, we need to go through with it, and this is the sacrifice we have to make. This pretty much sums up the games and its characters. They revolve around the idea of sacrifice, what is a human life, victory, and things like that. And it's really great because each decision you make doesn't just make some generic cutscene. No, it shapes the game from where it is to where it's going. Like, there are branching paths that you may or may not be aware of, and it really gives the game some replay value. I mean, I intend to replay the game just to see how different it is when I make these decisions over those decisions. And it's a really big draw. Now, the only thing I have against it story-wise is that, well, it's a pretty big shift. I mean, it's not a huge point against the story, but the last game, if anybody played it, was very upbeat. It was campy. And so to take this complete 180, it's really unexpected. It kind of like, it took some getting used to. But if you don't think too much about it, it won't be that big a deal. Okay? Okay. So let's move on to the gameplay. Alright, so let's talk about the gameplay. So, just like the Guided Fate Paradox, the gameplay goes like one cutscene, then the dungeon, then another cutscene. So, right now, let's just talk about the dungeons. You go through each one, you go through a set number of floors, you go killing enemies along the way, you collect items, and that's pretty much the standard fare of it. As you go through the dungeon, you have a set time limit with the AP bar, which you can replenish by eating things like apples. And of course, if you die, you will lose all your items. The difference is this time they've introduced the deitized system, where you can make yourself into a light or a dark element with attacks according to whichever element you have chosen. Now, of course, light goes against dark and vice versa, and if you put two of the same elements together, well, you will take more damage and you won't deal as much. And it even shows that your base form isn't really strong enough, because if you aren't either, you will probably take the most damage, as I've seen. It could be the difference between taking 30 damage or 15 damage. So it really forces you to think on your feet for which element is the best, because you will come across times where you're against 3 enemies and they'll be of different elements. So it really depends on moving on your feet, on thinking on your feet rather, and making sure you make the right choice. Speaking of, the difficulty of this game, like the last one, is just so random. Because you can go from a dungeon floor that maybe has 1 or 2 enemies to a floor that has about 20. And you'll face 3 at a time, which can be really frustrating because you only have about, 60 points of health. And some of these enemies deal out 20 per attack. And there are particular types of enemies that I have found to be incredibly annoying. Like enemies that can float off the map and still attack you, but you can't attack them because they aren't on the map. They're just little things like that irk me personally. May not irk you as much, but the difficulty spikes is really something that people should be made aware of. Outside of that, they have improved things such as how you upgrade yourself. Before, it was you had to level up in the dungeon, then you leave the dungeon, and then you level back to 1, but you keep the stat boost from the dungeon leveling. And now it's just you level up. You go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and so on. By each level up, you get skill points, and with those skill points, you can power up your devil form or your angel form. And each one comes with their own stat boost, their own skills, things like that. I found that this was a lot better than powering up my body with random badges like this was Final Fantasy XII's license system or something. Yeah, that's that. If you remember that, it's like that, just not quite as confusing, but almost. And now it's just, okay, I put this point here, I put this point there. And you even get points outside of battling when you go through certain cutscenes, and they give you the choice of talking to Ariel or Jupio, who we talked about earlier. And now we can talk about the cutscenes, because these cutscenes are long. They are long-winded. They expect you to pay attention. I mean, thankfully, the voice acting, which I'll talk about later, keeps it going where it sounds interesting. But these are some long cutscenes. And it makes you feel as though you're playing less game and watching more movie, which may or may not be a bad thing, but to me, if they want to have long cutscenes, then the dungeon should be longer, my opinion. So, if you personally like long cutscenes and short gameplay dungeons, then by all means. But sometimes the gameplay feels a little disproportionate from how much talking you'll have to deal with. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, let's start with the visuals first, since that gives me less to talk about. Because now, instead of having an overworld where you can explore, now there's a lot more still images of where you are. And I think that shift wasn't one of their best choices, because one of the things I did like was kind of poking around Celestia and seeing what everything is like. But now I just have artwork to look at. And it isn't bad artwork, but I prefer an overworld to said artwork. Anywho, the character stills, I wish they had more facial range or expressional range, because in the last game, it was those ranges that gave those characters personality. It let me know what type of character each of them were, and it let me know what type of people they were. Now it's just kind of like I have to rely on what they say and how they say things and things like that, which isn't necessarily the worst, but I still wish I had more than perk of a brow or gentle smile or worried face. You know, it's just their faces kind of get boring, especially since they only have like 5 different stills per character. Other than that, the dungeons look nice, because before it was more like, you know, the PS2 NIS graphics, and now everything is rendered in more 3D, and the characters are chibified, but they're not so cutesy that they rob the game of its seriousness, which I think is important, because if you're going to go for the chibi look in a serious game, you better not make it too cute, and I think they hit that right amount of cute to serious ratio, if there's such a thing. Anywho, so as far as the audio, the music I think is great, but I wish they had more songs for the dungeons, because you may hear about 3 or 4. And while I do love the dungeon music, I kind of like to hear more than just those few songs. As far as cutscenes go, you'll hear the same songs per still, depending on where you are. And the major part I want to talk about is the voice acting, because the voice acting in this game, excuse me, can range from really good to, oh my god, my ears are bleeding. Johnny Young Bosch lends his voice here, so you know that's good. There are other voices you have probably heard before if you play a lot of NIS games, and there are some characters that sound great. There are some characters that sound okay. And there are just some characters that just grate upon your ears when they speak. You'll know it when you hear it, but just brace yourself for that. So, other than that, music's good. Stills are okay. Voice acting, well, we just talked about that, so. So, to wrap this up, this game, I can say, is a true sequel. It took what was there and it made better of it in terms of gameplay. Instead of having confusing ways to upgrade your character, now you have skill points and a regular leveling up system. You have a streamlined new look of the game. I really like this 3D style as opposed to the old style we had before. I think it's great. I think the way you acquire skill points via the story is awesome, and I like the way that now that when you play the story, you are making choices that affects the characters around you. I think that that's a nice touch to this, and it really helps set the seriousness of the tone of the game, especially since a lot of the times what happens is your fault. Whatever you choose will shape the way this game goes, and I think that's amazing. Now, I do wish a lot of the voice acting was better, I wish there was more music, and I wish the proportion to cutscene to game was better. But all that aside, this is a great sequel. For that, I will give it a solid B. When you play it, you'll love it, and when you aren't playing it, you might not. But I do encourage those to sit through the story, to suffer through some of the voice acting, because what they have done here is made one of the best stories I've seen in a JRPG yet. So, with that said, you guys go pick this up and enjoy. And I do also encourage multiple playthroughs, because this does have multiple endings, and of course because you're making choices, it has different ways that the story can progress. So, alright, you guys go get this game, and I will see you next time.